My name is Tiffany Keith. I am an associate pastor at First United Methodist Church in Colorado Springs. Let us take a moment to bow our heads and say a word of prayer. God of all grace, we come together today with our eyes on you, on your future for this nation and all the world. We come with questions, doubts, fears, hopes, and dreams. So we ask you to move among us. Help us raise up leaders that walk in integrity with the character, intellect, and morality that represents the values and principles of your holy reign. More than anything, O God, during this time of gathering, pour into us your gentle peace, assurance, and grace, that in our every breath, we might know that you are the one leading and guiding us into the future of this nation. In your strong and holy name we pray. Amen.
I'm Rabbi Joshua Stanton, Senior Fellow of CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. We read from the Book of Lamentations about both pain and hope. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, chadesh yamenu kekedem. God, return us to you, and we will return. Renew our days as of old. This gathering at its core is about renewal, and we pray that in the process of renewing ourselves, we also come together to renew our country. Renew it that it may be a place of hope and justice, of fairness and equality, one that welcomes in the stranger, one that embraces science, one that is a meritocracy, one that gives us all a chance. We pray for a return that God makes possible, for we are God's partners in making a more perfect nation and a more perfect union, one that is blessed in diversity and also our particularities as human beings from different traditions who believe in pluralism. May we be strengthened in this return. Amen.
My name is Al Jackson, and I serve as bishop of a young single adult congregation in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Let us pray. We are grateful to thee, God, for the opportunity we have to convene the Convention of Founding Principles. Principles of faith, freedom, service, equality, truth, and justice are examples of what made this nation unique in the world. It is by thy hand that these founding principles are part of the fabric of America. It is our prayer this day that thy will bless the conference with thy spirit so that we all might be edified and strengthened. Bless those that will be addressing us, that they may say those things that are pleasing unto thee. We are grateful for thy hand in creating this nation and the freedoms we enjoy. Those freedoms, however, are under assault. Therefore, we plead with thee that we might have the strength and courage to stand up for what we believe per thy direction. Again, we are grateful for thy continued love, and we pray for thy guidance, particularly to those that are leading this nation. Please bless them with thy spirit. May we be worthy as to have thy hand intervene into the affairs of this nation and magnify our efforts to restore America under those internal guiding principles upon which this nation was founded. Our conference is dedicated to those principles, and we pray for thy blessings to be upon us, upon our nation, and upon our world. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
My name is Hussein Rashid. I am a roving minister of Muslim communities in New York City. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, the creator of all creation, the Lord of the day of justice, who by the dawn reminds us that time flies and we are foolish, unless we have faith, are righteous, and tell the truth, that we are created from one soul into tribes and nations to know one another, that we are to vie with one another in good deeds, that we are to stand for justice, even against ourselves, fearing no earthly power. In the name of the greatest teacher, grant us the faith of Muhammad the favored, the love of Khadijah the great, the wisdom of Ali the chosen, the courage of Hussein, and the radiance of Fatima with the voice of Zainab, to speak truth to power, to create a more just and equitable society, to stand with Musa and Maryam, to be humble in our being and bold in our dreaming, to be amongst those whose good deeds and whose service to others outweigh any faults. Amen.
Good evening. I'm J. MAGNESS. I am a bishop in the Episcopal Church. Please join me for prayer for our country, for our leaders, and for the work of this convention. Let us pray. Oh God, you have given us in this country a good heritage and blessed us in immeasurable ways. Humbly we pray that always we may prove ourselves a people mindful of your favor, people who are glad to do your will. Save us from violence, from discord, and from confusion. Enable us to be reminded of St. Augustine's 5th century counsel to guard against being overcome by arrogant pridefulness that will soon lead to our downfall. Endue with the spirit of wisdom those to whom we entrust the authority of our government, that they may work for justice and for peace in our land. Continually guide our leaders, not only to make wise decisions for the good of the people of this republic, but also for our global neighbors on this earth, our island home. Defend our liberties and fashion into a united people those who come to us out of many cultures and from many lands. In times of prosperity, fill our hearts with thankfulness. And in the day of trouble, let us fail not to be reminded of our dependence upon you. All this we pray in the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.
I'm Simran Singh, a member of the Sikh community. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. O divine, O Vaheguru, we live in tumultuous times. As we look at the world around us, we see fragmentation, fracturing, division. In these difficult times, please help us remember that you pervade every aspect of this world, that you are absolutely present in every moment, in every space, in every human being. Let us remember to treat one another as the divine beings that we all are. Let us celebrate our uniqueness and remember that it is our collective diversity that makes us all stronger. And at the same time, let us remember our shared origins, the one divine light. Let us acknowledge that we are all molded from a single clay, pots of a single potter. O divine, let us serve humanity as we wish to serve you, treat humanity as we wish to treat you, and honor humanity as we wish to honor you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' broad glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave fruit through the banner yet wave. Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
America is more than a place. It's a promise, which we strive daily to realize. And when our politics veers away from that promise,
Nobody likes me.
it is our solemn duty to stand up and demand better. Now is that time, and the Convention on Founding Principles is our chance. Thank you for joining this movement to chart a better, more principled way forward for the nation.
Good evening. Welcome to the Convention on Founding Principles. I'm Evan McMullin, and I'm here with Mindy, Finn, and Heath Mayo. We've been Republicans and conservatives our entire adult lives, but for the last 5 years, we've opposed the direction that Donald Trump has taken the Republican Party, and most importantly, the country. Tonight, we're in Charlotte, North Carolina, and today the RNC reached a grim milestone, nominating Donald Trump once again to be being the Republican nominee. We continue to oppose his direction, and we have continued to work with Americans across the country in all 50 states to defend founding principles and also to fight for a better future for all Americans. Today, we learned that the Republican convention will not pass a new platform. It will not offer solutions and new ideas for the country. Well, we're going to continue to fight. And tonight and for the rest of the week, on every single night of this week until Thursday, we're going to have an amazing lineup of speakers. We've got true patriots, everyone from General Hayden to Michael Steele to James Comey to Tara Setmeyer, to former Governor Christine Todd Whitman, and so many others. We even have some former Trump administration officials who we're proud to have with us tonight in this week as well, including Anthony Scaramucci and former senior DHS official Miles Taylor, who has recently announced his opposition to Donald Trump's reelection and his support for Joe Biden.
Thank you, Evan. I'm Heath Mayo. I'm the founder of Principles First, and I just want to say how excited I am to be here with all of you tonight. We've got our delegates from around the country tuning in, our registrants fired up. They're frustrated with where we're at as a country right now. And I mean, that's what I want to say a few words about, is the importance of this moment that we find ourselves in as a country. It is so important to have Republicans and independents, conservatives, principled people, principled patriots around the country standing up for ideas, for principles. As Evan mentioned, the GOP today didn't even pass a platform. That's how devoid of ideas it is. It doesn't care about ideas, and that's why it's so important that we're here together. And couldn't be more thrilled to be here with all of you today. I'm excited for what the future holds, and I want to encourage us. Trumpism is on the ballot in 2020. There's no doubt it's an important fight. But what are we going to do after November as a country? I want us to think about that. I know that our speakers have thought about that, and I hope that you join the conversation online, if it's YouTube, Facebook, hashtag CFP2020. We want to hear your thoughts, we want to hear your ideas, get involved in the conversation, and let's make a difference together.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mindy Finn. I just want to join the chorus in welcoming all of you to this terrific event tonight. You're in for a treat. Let me tell you, we have an incredible program in store for you tonight and all the way through Thursday. Who is joining us tonight? For this convention on founding principles, we have participants and speakers from across the nation. And I expect probably a few Americans living abroad too. Some like to say that disaffected Republicans are part of the DC cocktail party set. But let me tell you that the leaders that will feature throughout the night and week represent and reflect the diversity of America. These are hardworking Americans and concerned Americans. They're very concerned about the direction that not only the Republican Party is heading in, but even more so the country. And they are fired up and motivated to do something about it. We have a new generation of leaders, men, women, those of every faith, background, and livelihood. They're united in their love for America. This convention is truly representative of our vast diversity, and it's a sharp distinction from what you're seeing this week at the RNC. We also have honorable patriots, men and women who have stood up when it mattered most, and they're standing up again in this election to say enough is enough. It is time to move forward with competent and unifying and servant leadership who can be the type of leader that this country needs. Now, you often hear, or we often hear, and been doing this work over the last many years now, that conservative voters feel politically homeless. Every day we hear from more Republicans and conservatives who feel that they just don't have a political home. Their voice matters in this country as much as anyone else, as much as anybody who identifies strongly with a party or with a particular leader. And at this convention, it was very important to us in putting it together that all of you who identify with this movement have a home, that your voice matters, and that we were able to showcase that there's a powerful, growing coalition that's standing up for decent, competent, and honorable leadership. This event really gives me hope. You all give me hope. Freedom means having a voice, and by participating tonight in the chat on Twitter, we call this Principles Con, so we're at Principles Con on Twitter, or on Facebook, or on YouTube, or however you may be joining us. We do encourage you to engage in the conversation. Now, you may have heard about delegates. We selected delegates. These were also people who were the most active members of Stand Up Republic and Principles First and other coalition partners over the last few years. We made sure to have delegates from every state in the nation, even DC and Puerto Rico. And we asked these delegates to vote and vote for their choice in this presidential election. We had a feeling that many of these delegates didn't support Trump. It's one of the reasons they signed up for this movement. But I have to say that we were pretty surprised by the result of this straw poll. As you can see, we had Joe Biden with 87% support in the straw poll among our delegates. Every delegate had the opportunity to vote, 87% for Joe Biden, 1% for Donald Trump, the rest for the Libertarian and other candidates. This is really just kind of incredible. And Evan, was this the result that you were expecting?
Well, I think, as you point out, Mindy, that no one's going to be surprised that the delegates to this convention, the Convention on Founding Principles, don't have much support for Donald Trump, and they're preferring another path for the country and therefore for the Republican Party, or at least a chance for it. But what's interesting is that, as we poll, this movement of this principled movement, we know that several months ago, about a third of these delegates likely would have supported Justin Amash, who was considering running. And then, of course, he decided not to run. And in those several months, a lot has happened in the country with Donald Trump's failed leadership in the pandemic, economic woes that have come about as a part of that. And then also the racial unrest and Donald Trump's failed leadership on that front, too. And you see those people shifting into the Biden column. I think that's the thing that's most interesting about this. And I think it bodes well for Biden's election prospects.
I think that's right, Evan. And I just would reiterate about the delegates themselves. I mean, these folks have been at this fight ever since really Trump was elected, and even before then. I mean, these folks are principled conservatives, many of them. I know with the Principles First meetups that we were having even prior to the COVID hitting and keeping us all indoors. These folks are principled conservatives, Republicans that are just completely frustrated with where the party is at and where the country is at. And so to see those numbers from that straw poll and such widespread support for Biden really speaks to just how frustrated people are, because that is tough to do when you're a principled Republican, is to cross party lines and put country before party. And so many people are doing that. That's why I'm excited to get going here. And I'm excited to introduce Alex Boyer for the national anthem. He's from Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' broad glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Welcome back. I am so thrilled to have here with us tonight Mr. James Comey, the former director of the FBI, and Mr. Michael Steele, the former Republican National Committee chairman, and two very current patriots. Mr. Comey, Mr. Steele, thanks for joining us tonight.
Great to be
I'm
here.
going to get right into the conversation. Can you start with with both of you? Can you lay out for us, in kind of your briefest terms? I know we could probably talk about it all night. What's at stake in this election? Mr. Steele, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first off, let me just say what a treat it is for me personally to be on with Jim. And thank you, sir, for your service and putting up with what you had to put up with. But we understand how that goes sometimes in the trenches. And I think that's part and parcel of what's at stake here. Understanding what's going on in the trenches, that America has never been about one individual. It's never been about one party. It has been about the American people. Our story is a story that is part and parcel of experiences of individuals who've cobbled together this history, and at good times and bad times we've kind of come together. It has been about freedom. It has been about the Constitution. It's been about these broad principles that we try so hard to live up to. So in this time when we see our postal service used as a political, sledgehammer against the American people, when we find our leaders failing to just do the basics in providing information, let alone the kind of services you need to deal with COVID-19, it really gets to the heart of what this election is about for a lot of citizens. I get it, folks. I'm one of the most partisan guys out there. I was a national chairman. But at some point, you realize it's about your family, your community, and most especially your country. And there's no time better to think about that than right now.
Yeah, so Mr. Comey, many of our participants have been politically active. I mean, this is just part of who they are, but they're kind of feeling that this is this country over party movement. This is different than other moments. You haven't really historically been political, and now you're really speaking out because clearly you think this is an important moment. Can you talk about that decision for you? Now what's at stake, and why is this really the moment that patriots and men and women of courage like yourself must speak out?
Thank you, Mindy, and I'm honored to be with you and Michael. Thank you both for loving this country so much. I'm speaking out. I've never spoken at a political event before. I've never been politically active. I identified and registered as a Republican, but I had jobs that kept me away from partisan politics, and that's the way I wanted it. I'm speaking out now because I think, not to overstate it, because I don't think you can overstate it, what is America is at stake here. This amazing country of ours is an experiment. There's never been a nation that didn't have common language, common culture, common religion, common ethnic background to glue its people together to become a nation. We have none of that to knit this collection of people from all over the world into a nation. We have principles. We hold truths. We believe a certain set of things, and that's what keeps this country together. And at the center of it is a belief that the truth is real and that it matters, and it must be sought, it must be spoken, it must be at the center of our national life and our government. And Donald Trump represents an assault on all of that, on the idea that truth even exists. And if we ever become numb, become overwhelmed, allow the notion that truth is all relative and doesn't matter to become part of who we are, we cease to exist. And so I think the reason so many independents and former Republicans and principled Republicans are joining us tonight is they see the same thing, and they love this country too much to let it go without a fight. Lots of important policy disagreements. There are things above those that matter so much more than that, and the truth is foremost among them.
Thank you. So, Mr. Steele, let me just tell you, we're at this really unfortunate moment in our nation where we're deeply polarized. You and I working in politics, and Mr. Comey, we've seen this over the last 10 years, just this growing rift and polarization, and our elections becoming more about fear and hate of the other side than even kind of what your own side or your own guy or gal stands for. And we're seeing that kind of again now. We see the Republican, party or Trump trying to just, his main strategy is to try to scare people off to a Biden-Harris administration as a way to gain support. Can you say kind of for you, why a Biden-Harris admin at this time is less scary than a second Trump term?
Because at this moment, while we can have the big policy fights on healthcare and things like that, that's not what the country is looking for. It's not what the country's hungering for. They're hungering for a leadership that kind of brings the disparate parts of the nation together, particularly, Mindy, when you're looking at where we are on civil unrest right now, the killing of African-American boys in neighborhoods across the country, and the response to that. Just yesterday, yet another incident that the country is starting to grapple with. In the past, we've had leaders who would help us step into those moments that are very difficult. And yet we don't have that right now. Instead, to Jim's point, it's more about whose side are you on? If you're not wearing a mask, then you must be supporting Donald Trump. If you do, then you are not supporting Donald Trump. No, I'm wearing a mask because I want to stay alive. I want to protect my family. So these are the things that in this moment that the country is like, can we get past the stuff that's sort of ripping at who we are? We've been angry and resentful for a while now over a lot of different things for a lot of different reasons. And we all know that. And we can chronicle that, but that's not exactly what the country's looking for. And I think there are reasons why when you look at what you saw unfold last week at the Democratic National Convention, particularly for me, that roll call of the states, I remember tweeting out and saying to some folks, this is like the country is nominating this man. They know him and they know where his heart is. They understand the tragedy that's befallen his family. And they also know how he's walked through that. Even when it's been tragic for him, he's helped others. So I think that's the kind of thing people are looking for. And that empathy in our leaders is something we didn't think we'd ever miss, but boy, do we miss it.
Yeah, and Mr. Comey, what is your sales pitch to the undecideds in the Republican Party? We hear so often, probably most people that are participating in this convention, they know that they can't support Donald Trump or they don't want to support Donald Trump, but they're just having a hard time kind of crossing that Rubicon? What is your sales pitch to those types of undecided voters?
I asked them, so what do you think America is about? Is it about taxes and immigration and regulation? Is it about the things that we fight about normally in this country, or is it about something above that? Is it about a set of principles, the rule of law, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association? Is it about the things that this country was built to try and achieve? The answer is obvious. It's about those higher level things, and those are under threat. And if we lose those, it doesn't matter what your views are on taxes or immigration or regulation, because America is gone. And so if you love this country and you think about the principles on which she was founded, you have to vote those principles. And there's only one of the two candidates that represents those principles. You may have different views than Joe Biden on all kinds of things. He's a person of integrity and decency. And Republicans used to believe that character mattered most, that character came first. Well, it's time for all of us to remember that and to vote that and to elect Joe Biden the next president.
That kind of says it all. Mr. Comey, Mr. Steele, thank you so much for joining this convention on founding principle. We're honored to have you here and help us kick off the program today. We hope you'll tune in for some of the rest over the next few days. And we look forward to seeing you then. So for now, for all of our viewers, I am going to turn the program over to Judge Bob Orr of North Carolina for our gavel in.
Thank you.
On behalf of the organizers of the Convention on Founding Principles and our delegates from all across the United States and Puerto Rico, a warm welcome from Charlotte, North Carolina. North Carolina is the state of many firsts, not the least of which was the adoption of the Mecklenburg Resolves 245 years ago by a group of citizens right here in Mecklenburg County, setting forth principles of independence and democratic government. We're also the state first in flight, thanks to the Wright brothers. And now, North Carolina is the first host to the Convention on Founding Principles. On behalf of the Convention of Founding Principles, it's my privilege to gavel in the speakers for this year's convention. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Michael Singleton, and this is the Convention on Founding Principles, and what an incredible way to start tonight's programming. For the next 4 days, we'll hear from and talk to principled Republicans, conservatives, moderates, and independents who are committed to chartering a better path, not just for a political party that has lost its way, but for a nation at risk of becoming untethered from the principles on which it was founded. We'll be joined by speakers, thought leaders, writers, and activists from across the country as we talk about the daunting problems facing our nation and about the values and ideals which can shape our future. So make sure you're a part of the conversation by commenting on the feed and tweeting along using the hashtag CFP2020. Our theme for tonight is inspired by Benjamin Franklin's famous description of America, a republic if you can keep it. What did Franklin mean by that, and why are we remembering it now in 2020? To help answer that question, I'd like to welcome Brad Trawick and Reed Howard. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. Brad, I want to go to you first. What do you think Franklin mean when he made that statement describing America so many decades ago?
That's a great question, Michael. And I think we have to go to what Franklin said before the actual Constitutional Convention. He said, when you gather a number of men for their collective wisdom, you also gather with them their prejudices, their passions, you gather with them their error of opinions. But he was also an optimist because he understood, much like I do, that even when you gather those wise men in a room, even with all of their flaws, as long as they have the shared values and principles, and at the core of those principles is respect for human dignity, then you have the opportunity to not only create a long-lasting nation, but a nation that has the opportunity to change the world. And so we're at a space like that right now, where we can stand on our values, where we can stand on our principles, and also defend our republic.
And Brad, to you, what do you think the founding fathers, individuals like Benjamin Franklin, would think about the state of our country, our democracy today?
I think they would have a lot of questions. They would be scratching their heads. As much as George Washington warned against parties, I think even those who splintered into their separate factions would have to ask a question. As Evan talked about earlier, how could you even have a party that even starts off without even having a platform, without even declaring to the rest of the nation what their vision for the country is, what their values for this nation are, what principles that they stand on? That is not what they set out for this country to be. That is not the vision that they had for us, and I think they want more.
And Reed, to you, how important are principles? Because there seems to be a lot of principles missing today in the current Republican Party.
Exactly. I think that's the reason why Americans are so worried about the future of our country, is the lack of moral leadership and principled leadership that we're seeing from our president, but increasingly from the rest of the Republican Party. But I just want to preface this by saying that's why this moment, this convention on founding principles, gives me so much hope. It's a reminder of how generous and principled we can be. It is a celebration of all that is good in America. And sure, Michael, my generation knows that a meeting of 5,000 can become a movement of 5 million through the power of the internet. So I'm excited for what we're starting and catalyzing here tonight.
Now, Reed, don't leave me out, man. You said your generation. I think we're part of the same generation. Remind me if I'm wrong. So Reed, I want you to put on your academic hat. You're down in Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University studying theology, divinity. Talk a little bit about principles from a spiritual perspective.
Well, certainly, sure, Michael. So what we're seeing is we need a leader who can call out the better angels of our country. And that speaks to who we are in a political sense, but also who we are as Americans. And there's something spiritual about that. When the George Floyd protests and uprising broke out this summer, we saw Donald Trump grab the microphone of the White House. And instead of calling us to our better angels like presidents before him would have, he used that bully pulpit to divide America. And there's something happening in our country. A lot of the people that I speak with talk about a coarsening effect over the last 4 years alone. That's why I think it's so important that we put forward leaders who will stand on principle, who care about something bigger than just themselves. And I'm excited to see that our delegates to this convention have overwhelmingly voted to go in a new direction.
And Brad, in thinking about that new direction, there appears to be one underlining question that many voters, Republicans or independent leaning Republicans may be asking themselves, and that is, what does it mean to be a conservative today?
Wow, that's such a great question. And I'm really excited that we've actually brought together people from across the country to actually answer that question. And at the core of it truly is the respect for individual rights and respect for human dignity. This country was founded on the idea, and as we talked about, as we talked about so many times before, on the idea that we can expand the human capability, on the idea that if we give people the opportunity to pursue the American dream, they can and they will achieve it. And as long as we're setting forth policies and setting forth a vision for this country that allows for people to do so, I think that we will come out of this thing on the other side way stronger than we were going in.
No, I think you are absolutely correct. And I want to thank both Brad and Reed, and you will see more of them throughout the rest of the night. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our first speaker of the night, and that's Amanda Carpenter. Amanda is an author, CNN political commentator, and former Cruz campaign spokeswoman. Here's Amanda.
Hello. It's an honor to speak with you today, although I do have to ask, what are we really doing here? This is strange, right? I'm speaking to you for a virtual convention because we can't be together. Life as we know it isn't normal anymore. Our kids aren't going to school like normal. We aren't going to work like normal, shopping like normal, or celebrating birthdays and holidays like we should either. And why? Well, the simple explanation is that it's because of selfish, arrogant, magical thinking by our president. Last January and February, Donald Trump didn't want to confront the coronavirus because he thought it might make him look bad, or maybe hurt the economy a little bit. So he did what a lot of people do to protect themselves. He obfuscated and then he told outright lies to try to wish it all away. He said that people who were worried about it were perpetuating a hoax. They were out to get him. It was a conspiracy. We know how this goes, right? They said coronavirus is just like the flu. Don't worry, masks don't work. Don't listen to Dr. Fauci, they say. Try some hydroxychloroquine instead. And just what has all this magical thinking gotten us? Well, I can't even tell you the number of people who have died from coronavirus, because by the time this video is posted, it will only be thousands upon thousands higher. These conspiracies have consequences. And as a result, our American way of life has been robbed from us for the past 6 months. How many more months are we going to lose? How many more people are we going to lose? Because this isn't just about coronavirus. This is about a paranoid way of campaigning and governing that has plunged our nation into crises on all levels: political, economic, health, media, education, everything. It's about a birther conspiracy that Donald Trump based his first presidential campaign upon. It's about how he calls the free press the enemy of the people, and how there's a whole political machinery behind him that traffics constantly in the politics of hate by teaching their followers to hate their liberal friends and neighbors because they supposedly hated them first. What is this? This is not who we are. It's about how Donald Trump says there's a deep state working against him in Washington and dismisses the findings of our intelligence community to take Vladimir Putin's side in Helsinki. It's about how Trump is saying the election is rigged so that no one will trust the results if he loses. I wish I could tell you that Donald Trump was the only problem here, but there are a lot of people who are in on these games. There are many media and corporate leaders who explicitly coddle and cultivate this kind of thinking. They won't or don't want to stand up for what's right and what is wrong because they would much rather play both sides of the most bogus debates. They have their interests, more clicks, more money, more influence that they prioritize above the health and safety of the American people. Social media titans act as top recruiters for conspiracy theaters. It's on purpose. They deploy algorithms to funnel people into the most radical of channels. And because of this, there is a new political movement. It's blossomed online, and it's based on the idea that there is a group of liberal, elitist, pedophiliac Satan worshipers who eat children. Yeah, that sounds too stupid to take seriously, but at this point, we'd be stupid not to, because they have millions of followers. The FBI has designated them as a domestic terror threat. And you've seen the signs and t-shirts at Trump rallies, right? It's there. And Trump sees it. He stokes them on, feeding their addiction to this sick story, one tweet at a time. The entire movement is based on vengeful prophecies of political retaliation that just never come true. They look everywhere for clues that aren't there. And maybe it wouldn't matter if it stayed in chat rooms and random threads, but it spills over dangerously into real life. According to NBC News, there have been armed standoffs, kidnappings, a shooting, and at least 2 murders linked to the group. And still, there are dozens of congressional candidates who have expressed some kind of support for them. Some of them are going to win their elections too. It's real painful to admit, but the fringe has a very firm foothold in Republican politics. If it's not taking it over completely, it's hard to tell. This will be Donald Trump's political legacy. Richard Hofstadter once described a paranoid style of American politics in his 1974 essay, but I don't think even he ever expected it would become the animating theory of it. And it's real tempting to tell ourselves this is just some weird phase, a fad. It's not that much different than the Satanic Panic in the 1980s, or maybe even the Salem witch trials in the 1600s. But this time, it happens online with lightning speed. And it's not confined to political circles, not at all. We are suffering through a terrible convergence of medical and political disinformation by faceless groups who prioritize their political beliefs above all facts and evidence. Regular Americans who have suffered great loss in their life, like losing a child in a school shooting, are harassed relentlessly as crisis actors, unable to mourn in peace. And it's all because people don't want to believe that gun violence is real. There are anti-vaxxers who relentlessly peddle bogus medical advice And as a result, we see diseases that have been eradicated from the earth coming back. There are people in these groups that tell young mothers to give their sick children bleach cures for their ailments. And what's really sad is it's not that much different from when the president suggested injecting disinfectant as a possible COVID miracle cure. Tell me, are we going to break this spell? How soon? We have to break this spell. And this is why the sixth principle for the Convention on Founding Principles is absolutely critical. It says that we have to embrace truth, facts, and knowledge and reject those who deceive people through disinformation and other means in pursuit of power. This is not a theoretical choice. Earlier this summer, as Donald Trump spoke in the Rose Garden, troops fired tear gas on peaceful protesters. And then, even though we saw it, it was captured on film with numerous eyewitnesses, they denied it ever happened. I don't want to see what else Trump will do. Do you? Or even worse, what his followers will believe. All of this misinformation, disinformation, and lies are hurting and killing us. And I wish that were an overstatement. But the president's handling of coronavirus has shown us firsthand what the painful consequences of all these conspiracies are. If you want to end it, you have to be an ambassador for the truth. You need to be an ambassador for the sixth principle. Your country needs you. And I know you're ready, and I know you will, even though I can't see you right now, because you're searching out for this virtual fellowship today. Thank you for finding us. We are so lucky to have found you. I wish you nothing but the best. And we'll know that things are getting better when we can see each other in person. And I hope and pray that day comes very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda Carpenter. And I agree with Amanda, as I'm sure most of you do. Conspiracy theories do have consequences. This is about more than the president's ego, and it makes Amanda's call for us all to be ambassadors for truth all the more important. The divisions that are being sold in our country are dangerous, which is why we must unify and demand the truth now. Like many Americans, our next speaker knows firsthand how painful it can be when hate and fear are used to hurt and marginalize. And he has a few thoughts on how we can all come together, unified and equal, to help improve America. Here's Clarence Mingo.
Greetings. I'm Clarence Mingo, and it's an honor to be with you. These are very difficult times that we as Americans are living through. All of us have watched with a great deal of discomfort about the challenges that we are facing. Irrespective of where you are at in America, you have likely been gripped by the death of George Floyd. His death has served as a reminder that despite the fact that we've elected the first African-American president and that we have decades-old civil rights legislation, Americans still have a significant amount of work to do with respect to race relations. This topic, very difficult to discuss, often is defined as the great American sin. And now is the time, and this is the very hour in which we must begin doing the very hard work to remedy this issue and eradicate it from the American landscape. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about a path forward and how it is we can begin having meaningful conversations to resolve this issue and to ensure that we have a much better future insofar as our ability to communicate and interact with one another, irrespective of skin color or socioeconomic status. Let me tell you a very brief story. I once knew a little boy who, in the year 1979, was growing up in a predominantly all-Black housing project. This little boy, along with a friend, rode his bike, maybe 2 or 3 miles away from home, and as they got down the road, they were surrounded by 5 white men, all of whom were on motorcycles, and one of whom pulled off a sawed-off shotgun and said, "Brace yourself. Nigger, you have 5 seconds to run." And so the little boy did. He and his friend pedaled all the way back home. Sometime later, that little boy and his family moved from that predominantly all-Black housing project to a middle-class white suburb. And the little boy and his family were the first African Americans on this particular street. In this environment, there too, they encountered the very difficult issue of race relations because the neighbor on the left and the neighbors on the right and everyone else in the surrounding area took out petitions to ensure that that family was moved off of that street. Each morning, the little boy and his family would wake up and hear a very warm and affectionate, "Good morning, nigger." On another day, the family looked across the street. The house adjacent to it had "nigger lover" spray painted on the side of the house. And still another morning, they woke up and found a little cross burnt on the porch. Now, that little boy, this young man that I'm referring to, is standing in front of you. It's me, Clarence Mingo. And I sometimes ask myself, why is it? Why is it that within the deep recesses of my heart, there is no hate, no ill will, no animosity towards my fellow white Americans? Now, the reason is because, and I vividly remember this, the hot summer of 1980, my mother standing on the back porch lecturing my siblings and I, reminding us that we were going to love and we were going to have fellowship with our fellow white Americans, and that we would make no distinction towards the many based on how a few may have treated us. And so that summer, my parents articulated and taught us the seminal remedy for the issue of race relations, and it was defined as follows: love and fellowship. My parents would always say, every single person you meet, white or black, you're going to find cause and reason to love them. Every single person you meet, you will find cause and reason to have fellowship with them. And that is indeed what we need today. It is first base for ensuring that we are ending the problem of race relations. We must induce a greater measure of love, one towards another. We must ensure that we are fellowshipping. The simple idea that those we don't know, we have an interest, a curiosity, and a reason to know them beyond a simple wave or a gentle smile. It's critical that we do this with respect to people who don't look like us, people who are perhaps in a different socioeconomic bracket, people who perhaps culturally are not familiar to us. This is the very concept of fellowship. And fellowship is made all the sweeter when it is encased in love. Now, fast forward, if you will, with me. We were in the year 1980. Come with me to the year 1992. My oldest sister is getting married. Think back to the neighbor on the left that I referred to. This gentleman was a guest at my sister's wedding in 1992. The hate, the bigotry, and the ill will that existed was expunged. The principles that did it, love and fellowship. We as Americans must get there and embrace these twin principles as first base, the fastest and best solution to begin eradicating race relations. But we have to go further. There is another principle that we must employ if we are to end race relations, and it's simply this. It's understanding. Irrespective as to whether you are black or white, you have a duty and obligation to have some measure of understanding about those who you are unfamiliar with. And that understanding leads to wisdom. It allows you to embrace truth, and it allows you to appreciate the plight of others. What does understanding look like in practice? Very easy. Look, understanding allows you to accept and to acknowledge that if your name is Michael, you may be more likely in the United States of America to get a job over Monique. Understanding allows you to accept the fact that if your name is Abdul, you might be viewed or treated differently for employment purpose rather than if your name were Alan. Understanding allows you to accept the fact that women in the boardroom are often treated a little differently than perhaps men might be. Understanding is not constant. It is moment by moment, but when appropriate, it allows you to accept very hard truths. It provides perspective and insight into the experiences of others. We as Americans believe that we are all created equal. And we also believe that equality and the ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness does not come from government. Rather, it comes from God. As we seek God for those things, we must also seek him for understanding, that we might appreciate the hard realities for others, that we might be sympathetic to and a part of the solution for making those realities better. This is the obligation of every American, and we must seize upon it. Beyond understanding, we must also ensure that we are looking at the issue of race relationships, not from a political perspective, but rather from a personal perspective. Listen, there is no politician, There is no Republican, nor is there a Democrat who will find a solution to end race relations. We can pass civil rights legislation, we can have Supreme Court cases dealing with this issue, and we can deal with it by way of local government. But ultimately, the political class in America and the policies around it will not end this issue. This must be a personal task. Every single American has to examine his or her own heart and begin thinking about whether or not they are contributing to this challenge or whether or not they are solving it. We must search our heart for implicit bias. We must search our heart for those attitudes and those feelings that are unacceptable and that are often based simply on the color of a person's skin or perhaps their socioeconomic status. This is not a political issue. It is a personal issue. And we as individuals, neighbor to neighbor, peer to peer, coworker to coworker, as individuals, must begin undertaking the hard work. No matter what the political class does, no matter the legislation that is passed, we have it within ourselves, a God-given ability to approach one another in love, with understanding, seeking fellowship, to ensure that the barriers to ending race relations are removed. And finally, I would simply tell you this. We here in the United States of America have to understand that out of many, we are one. Not out of many, we are the majority. Not out of many, we rule. Rather, out of many, we are one. That simply means that America is a magnificent quilt with diverse cultures, all of which is proving to be a fantastic experience in human history, where freedom and capabilities and opportunities all converge to ensure that we are the beneficiaries of this great land where freedom abounds, where oneness is appreciated, and when greatness has been the hallmark of our history. Out of many, we are one. And that one is Black, it is white, it is male, it is female, it is Christian, it is Jewish, it is Catholic, and many other things. And so I'm encouraging you today, think carefully about the measure of love and fellowship in your heart and how it can be applied to the issue of race relations. Think carefully whether or not you are exercising understanding about the hardship or the life of your fellow Americans. Think carefully as to whether or not you understand the idea of oneness and how it applies to the United States of America. And I would also caution you to guard your heart from seeing this as a political issue. Recognize it as one that is personal, wherein you have a responsibility and a God-given capability to make this a better place for each American, irrespective of your color. We can do this. I'm confident of it. And I look forward to walking with you on this journey. I'm Clarence Mingo. Grace and peace to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clarence. And combating racism must be a personal task. Love, understanding, and unity, as Clarence points out, are all key tools for combating racial divisions in America. But I want to focus on one thing Clarence mentions, and that is ensuring that racial relations are not a political issue. Sadly, right now, political partisanship is shaping our conversation on racial relations and equal justice. So I want to welcome back our panel, Brad Trawick and Mindy Finn, to talk a little bit about equality, racism, and politics. And Brad, I want to go to you first. As an African-American, you look at the current state of the Republican Party. Tell the audience, what does it mean to you as a lifelong conservative, as a lifelong Republican?
You think you give me a harder question? No. I think one of the things that we have to look at is there's a juxtaposition that I'm looking at when I look at the party right now. I see that there's so much opportunity and so much desire for engagement in the African-American community on the part of Republicans. We have a number of African-American Republicans running for congressional races, for Senate races, not to mention state and local across the country. I think I tried to look up all of the federal races at one point in time before all the primaries were done, and I counted about 48 African-American individuals running as Republicans. To me, that shows that there is a large space and opportunity for African-Americans to engage. However, when I look on the back end, when I look and see how many opportunities that the GOP is providing for African-Americans to register as voters, when I look at how much opportunity there is for creating a platform that speaks directly to African-American voters in this country, I see a lack. And it's slightly discouraging. And that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do. so that we can begin to build that bridge for more African Americans to genuinely be able to engage with the Republicans on what our principles and what our values are.
Yeah, but I want to stick with you for a minute, Brad, because there are likely African Americans watching this program, and they're going to say these guys are principled and we support them. But they're going to look at the overall Republican Party and they're going to say, there is no way in the world I could ever support that party. What do you say to those individuals who may share in our conservative philosophy and beliefs and positions, but they don't feel that they have a home in today's current Republican Party?
I would tell people what I've been telling people since I got involved in politics back in college, and that's quite frankly, you've got a friend in me, and that work has to start somewhere. And if you believe in these values, if you know that with this party, you have the opportunity to build your own business, to have an opportunity to choose where and how your children are educated, where you have the opportunity to move in different spaces and to climb the rungs of the American dream like never before, come with me and let's do the work. It's hard to put out the fire from inside the house, but you can't tell where the fire is located unless you're in there doing the work as well.
Right. No, I agree with that. And Mindy, the Republican Party has had a very difficult time with Black Lives Matter. How do you think the party should approach this movement? Because it is a movement that is clearly not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's right, Shermichael. And look, I have to admit that in all my years kind of working within the Republican Party, I used to defend the party. I thought it got a bad rap in being called and accused of being racist. And as we know, as the Black Lives Matter movement has taken hold over the last few years, at first, the counter message from not necessarily just the Republican Party, but conservatives writ large was, no, it's not that Black Lives Matter, it's that all lives matter. And, I think at this point, I really reject that notion and the fact that there is that, dichotomy and divide. Because what I have come to realize is that all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. And that Black Americans have been discriminated against. They haven't had access to the same types of opportunities, that we do have deep-seated racism in our country. And unfortunately, we do see it, not across the entire Republican Party, but in streams of the Republican Party and in kind of the leadership of the Republican Party today. Whether it's, direct through kind of what they say, or it's things like when Donald Trump, after Charlottesville, kind of said there are good people on both sides. When there are kind of protests in the streets, only focuses on kind of the few people who are going too far versus the really peaceful protesters that are out there from every race and every background, and even from to some extent from both parties. Yet he kind of looks at that and criticizes that frankly he tear gassed peaceful protesters who were out there standing up for Black Lives Matter. So, at this point, I think there are sort of different, just like any movement, there are different strains within Black Lives Matter. And, it's maybe fair to point to when something goes too far, when there's looting and when there's violence. But to reject the Black Lives Matter writ large, I think is a failure to kind of address and accept the way that this country has treated Black people historically. And it's a failure to address the fact that there is still more work to do. Yes, as Brad said, we are a nation that have of opportunity. That is still true, though I think really under threat. But we also have real deep inequalities in this country across racial lines and other lines. And so it is time, I think, for the Republican Party to stand up and to address that. And it did seem for some years that the party was going more in that direction, that the party prioritized at least outreach to Black Americans and outreach to Hispanic Americans and to other racial minorities. I think the piece that was really missing is that a lot of it was just words and talk, and it didn't translate into actions. And today we're at a place where there's not even the same types of words and talk coming from above. So if we're going to move forward kind of past Trumpism and into the future, the conservative movement and the Republican Party should not be one that is defined by race. It should not be defined by white identity. It should be defined by ideas and policies that they are committed to trying to appeal to a broad cross-section of Americans. And I think as part of that, they have to recognize that and acknowledge that there still is deep racial inequality. And the Republican Party has a role to play in addressing that just as much as, a Democratic Party or any other American.
No, Mindy, I think those words are powerful. And the reality is, if we were to be frank, our country has made considerable progress. I think most people would recognize that. But to bring it back specifically to the Republican Party, why do you think individuals who hold racist views, if you will, why do those individuals seem to find a home in the Republican Party and not the Democratic Party? I mean, again, what does that say about where the Republican Party is? What does that say about the supposed values that the Republican Party currently maintains?
Yeah, I mean, the message coming from the leaders in the Republican Party is that racism is tolerated, that you shouldn't be criticized, you shouldn't be cast out, you shouldn't be seen to that your views are lesser than if they are racist views, that white superiority is acceptable. And I don't mean to be so dramatic, but that is the case. I think the other thing is that in order for someone to want to join a movement or join a party, they need to be able to see themselves in that party. And this is not a party that has prioritized, say, electing women, electing African Americans, electing Hispanic candidates. Certainly they have some of those candidates, but it is not a priority, certainly not today. I think it has been more of a priority in the past, and I hope that it's a priority in the future. But if you look across the Trump cabinet, if you look across Congress, if you look across kind of all the commissions, the postal commission's getting a lot of attention, and you look at that board of governors, and they are all white men. And for people out there in America today that are not white men, and you look at that and you think, this is not, I don't belong there. I don't see someone there who is like me. And that is a problem for a party that, has any hope to appeal to those beyond kind of its very strong white and largely male base at this point.
Brad, I mean, the reality is, as African Americans, I think we know perhaps better than most that this country was not built on giving up. But I think for a lot of people, as they look at the state of the country, they look at the state of the Republican Party, a lot of people are concerned that maybe we are going down a direction, a road less traveled, where we may not be able to turn around, particularly people of color. What do you think other principled conservatives can do, should be doing right now to build those bridges with minorities in our country to say, no, we are going to determine the principles and values that this country should stand for?
It's a great question, Michael. And quite frankly, at the risk of sounding maybe too much like a Democrat, I'd like to quote Obama on this one. And I like to say, get out from behind your keyboards and go meet your neighbors. It was often touted the most segregated hour in America was not any time during the week, but it was 10 a.m. on a Sunday, right? If you're an evangelical Christian, I highly encourage you to go out and meet some of your neighbors, meet some of your fellow Christians from across the railroad tracks or from across town in congregations that don't look like you. If you have a problem with these schools that, we like to talk about, school choice all the time, but actually go to these schools where the children all don't look like your kids. Go out and engage with these communities, go meet these people, and you'll find that you'll have more in common with them than you have differences. And I think that that's so important, is that we think that in terms of engagement, I sit in so many of these meetings and they have conversations like they're going into a foreign country and meeting brand new special people, and they're not. They're meeting Americans who might be having different experiences for very terrible and shameful reasons, but Americans nonetheless, Americans who cherish hard work, who cherish education, who cherish their families. And it's time that we do the work of getting out from behind our keyboards, logging off of Facebook and Twitter, and going out and engaging with our fellow Americans. And then we'd have the opportunity to do so much more.
And look, Mindy, this topic is so incredibly important. And I know this is something that you care a lot about. I think it's something that our audience cares a lot about. You talked about the recent straw poll. So many of our delegates, over 80%, said that they support former Vice President Joe Biden to become president. What do you think that says about Biden's ability to handle the current racial divisions in our country compared to Mr. Trump?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So, we're at a moment of racial unrest. I mean, I hope that it's died down for a little bit, but after George Floyd's murder and the protests, it's a perilous time for our nation. And this comes amid compounding crisis, a public health crisis, an economic crisis. And these crises just highlight kind of the deep inequality, in our nation. And I think what has become clear for obviously Democrats and a majority of independents, but now this segment of Republicans or former Republicans, is that Donald Trump is not making these racial divisions better. He is making them worse. And they see in Joe Biden somebody who came into this race, and kind of the first issue that he ran on, he said he wanted to restore the soul of this nation. And he focused on Charlottesville, and he focused on the white supremacists marching in the streets with their tiki torches, shouting, "Jews will not replace us," and marching for white supremacy. And he said this is what he was getting in the race to combat. And that was many months ago. That was last fall. And now we have this moment of deepening racial unrest. And, Americans it is a country over party moment. You do see a lot of women in particular in the suburbs who may lean conservative and usually vote Republican. I mean, they're reliably Republican in a lot of ways, but they're wanting to raise their children to see that all people are equal and that we all kind of deserve human dignity. They want to see a nation that is kind of less racist and where there's less inequality than there was when they were growing up or when their parents were growing up. And so when they look at where we are today and Donald Trump's president, and you have this racial unrest on his watch, it is only natural that they would say, we need to turn away from that. We need to move forward, and we need to support Joe Biden, who, maybe I disagree with him, or I likely disagree with him. That's what I hear from a lot of people on many issues, but he will unite the country. He will bring us back together. He will be a president for all Americans, no matter your race, your color, your creed, your background, your income, your gender. And it's because of that I think he really has been able to appeal across the aisle, and why you see in our straw poll, which was voted by the majority of Republicans. I mean, majority of the people in that straw poll were Republicans and the rest were independents, that Joe Biden received 87% of that vote.
I think that's a testament, Mindy. And the reality is, I implore you, as Brad said, go out and meet someone who's different. Go out and meet someone who's a different race from you, or perhaps a different religion, or perhaps someone whose native tongue is a bit different. Because the reality is, what this country faces is bigger than one person, and it's bigger than one party. I want to thank our panelists, Brad and Mindy, for that conversation, because it's a great setup for our next speaker, R. Derek Black, whose personal story gives him a unique perspective on this issue. He was born into a hateful ideology, but with some help came a long way and was able to break free of the white supremacist movement, and again, break free. Here's R. Derek Black.
I was born into one of the leading families of the American white nationalist movement. I spent my teenage years running white nationalist radio and media, winning a local Republican election, appearing in interviews, and organizing activist training seminars. And then, in 2013, I publicly condemned the movement after years attending public liberal arts college, where I experienced condemnation, open dinner, protest, and confrontation. I've spoken against white supremacy in the years since. The year that I was born, 1989, was also the year that my godfather David Duke won his race for Louisiana state legislature as a Republican, despite having led the Ku Klux Klan just a decade prior and continuing to espouse white supremacist positions. My dad, Don Black, was managing the campaign's digital operations and was working to support his friend of many decades. In that campaign, they had received formal condemnations from Ronald Reagan, from then President George H.W. Bush, and from the Republican Party Chairman Lee Atwater. The next year, David ran for U.S. Senate unsuccessfully. The year after that, he ran for Louisiana governor, but he also lost. In those campaigns, however, he won 55% and 60% respectively of the white vote statewide. He never used racial epithets. He campaigned against higher taxes, against big government, against free trade, because he said it hurt workers, and he advocated sending troops to patrol the border with Mexico. In 2008, When I was 19, I filed my paperwork for a spot on the local ballot to fill an executive committee seat for the Palm Beach County Republican Party. I was careful not to talk too explicitly about race, but I spent time talking to my Republican neighbors about how social programs took too much of their taxes and gave it to people who weren't like them. I talked about how Hispanic immigration was overwhelming their city. I suggested that there were parts of town that had more gun crime, not because of poverty or segregation, but because of the culture of those people who live there. I won that small race with over 60% of the vote. Once my background became widely known, it escalated into a national scandal. The party leaders condemned me and ultimately had me unseated. David Duke came to town to defend me. I received death threats, but also local praise by people I met whenever I was out. There was a period where I couldn't pay for my order at Dunkin' Donuts because somebody in line would inevitably take the charge and tell me to keep up the good work. That's the context in which I spent my childhood until college. After I matriculated at a small Florida liberal arts college in 2010, I knew it was only a matter of time before the world of that social justice community and my activism collided. Ultimately, over years, the college community compelled me to change my worldview. Widespread campus condemnation led me to accept an invitation to weekly Shabbat dinners organized by an observant Jewish student. One of his suite mates in the dorms, Allison Gornick, initially stopped attending those dinners whenever I showed up, but the college was a small place and we eventually got to know each other. Over the next 2 years, Allison and I started to talk privately about what I believed and why, and I listened when she came back with better research. In full disclosure, all these years later, Allison is now my wife. I don't have the years in college those conversations took me, but in brief, the arguments and counter-arguments were these. I eventually had to accept that there is robust research demonstrating that access to resources and education predict crime rates, not race. That the same IQ test cannot be universalized around the world as white nationalists try to claim. Race itself cannot be biologically defined, and most of all, opportunities in our society are biased in favor of white people. In a study that's been replicated many times, identical resumes are much more likely to be given a call back when the applicant has a white name rather than a typically black one. A black child raised in a two-parent family in an upper middle-class home is likely to end up with the same lifetime income as a white person raised in a single-parent home with half that income. African Americans charged with the same crime are given longer sentences than white people, even when the judge giving the sentence is made aware of this disparity and asked to avoid it. And yet millions of white Americans, when polled, will say that discrimination in America is now greater against white people. I'm honored to participate in the Convention on Founding Principles. It's not often that I'm asked to speak as a former Republican rather than a former white nationalist. And I want to make it clear, I don't think Donald Trump is a white nationalist. The president is not a follower of the white nationalist movement, but rather he uses the same fear and beliefs that they are both trying to stoke. Neither white liberalism nor white conservatism is intrinsically anti-racist. Partisans at both ends of the political spectrum have tried to benefit from white fear of non-white people and have promoted racism. But let's be clear. It is the Republican Party that has become the home and mainstream advocate of white identity politics. Long before Trump, white nationalists saw this. Throughout the decades since the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, segregationists and anti-immigrant activists moved to the Republican Party and fought out their ideological battles in its halls. Republican elites used this momentum as a political tool. Richard Nixon's strategy to win the South relied on appeals to whites who opposed integration and opposed anti-racist social programs. Nixon ran to victory on white backlash to civil rights, and so did Reagan, who announced his 1980 campaign at the Neshoba County Fair in Mississippi, promising to fight for states' rights, the longtime cry of segregationists. And yet, not even advocates in the white nationalist movement expected such a full and swift retreat of the pro-immigrant ideological wing of the Republican Party or of the conservatives who denounced racial discrimination. I now regularly watch political speeches by elected politicians that advocate extreme immigration restriction. I see the president's preference for European immigrants and lawmakers and the courts calling to abolish affirmative action and voting rights. This all mirrors the white nationalist positions that I always thought would be more difficult to gain widespread acceptance. I can't offer a clear way out, other than to say that the racist demagoguery that has come to dominate the Republican Party is not the only thing it ever was. Anti-racism means fighting against systems that disadvantage one group because of our biases, self-protection, our historical advantages, or our fear. If you believe that a dynamic economy is one where no one's identity and culture should prevent them from work, home ownership, wealth accrual, or freedom of participation in speech, then you have committed yourself to fighting white supremacy and racism. I'm open to hearing conservative answers to the cancer of racism in some future election, but to be honest, this year I hope you're voting for Joe Biden. His policy proposals, providing $50 billion in public-private venture capital to entrepreneurs of color and $100 billion in low-interest business loans, should appeal to people from all across the spectrum. And your alternative is another term of the most explicitly white supremacist administration in recent history. As we all move through the world, we will encounter people who believe in white nationalism in one form or another. We can choose which path to take, engaging in logical arguments, especially if we're white and we feel safe doing so, or protesting the larger system of white supremacy. But what we can't do is nothing. Silence is the only wrong choice. Thank you.
That was a powerful speech by R. Derek Black, and one of the more eye-opening lessons from that speech, and really from the last several years, is how quickly fringe or bigoted movements can take control in a political party. It really does emphasize the importance of adhering to our principles above political expediency. And I should remind you all that the government we have will be no more or no less than what we make it. No more or no less than our willingness to speak for what is good and right, and our willingness to speak up against the things that are bad and wrong. I want to bring back our panelists, Heath and Reed. And Heath, I want to go to you first. And this is interesting. You spoke about this earlier today. The RNC announced that it would not write a 2020 platform. What does that indicate about the Republican Party? And when you think about white supremacy, what do you think that sends signal-wise to those individuals who maintain those values and look to Trump, if you will, as their leader? And I put air quotes around that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Michael. And I think, speeches like the one we just heard from Mr. Black are so important. That change of heart, realizing that people's hearts can change at a time when the country is dealing with these issues, whether it's police brutality or just racial equality. I mean, our school system is also, working through these issues with the opportunity gap. I mean, Black children graduate at lower rates than their white peers in our high schools, and then they're incarcerated at 5 times the rate. That's a problem in the United States. And the fact that the Republican Party has just basically recycled its 2016 platform, not even caring to weigh in on these issues, it says a lot about where they put ideas in sort of the rank priority of things that matter. Instead, what you have is Charlie Kirk going out there for the first speech and, giving an ode to Trump and Trumpism. He wrote a book called The MAGA Doctrine. I mean, for crying out loud, this is not idea-driven politics. When there's so many things and challenges our country faces, how is it that the Republican Party can't be offering a bold, positive vision rooted in opportunity, rooted in principles? It's just beyond me, Michael. I don't get it.
Heath, I got to tell you, I think a lot of people have that same question, my friend. Reed, I want to go to you. What exactly are people saying on social media? And for you guys who are watching, we want you guys to be engaged. Remember, the hashtag is CFP 2020. So, Reed, I know you have a good quote of a tweet that our listeners may want to hear.
So the conversation is just exploding online. This is really taking off. And I'm excited to share a tweet from J.A. Hodge. They say, really wishing some of my more liberal and progressive friends were watching CFP 2020 to hear these important conversations about race relations, racism, and the importance of Black Lives Matter. Definitely not your father's GOP. Principles con, we care about people. So it's definitely resonating with America that we're talking about these issues the GOP has been too scared or too unwilling to approach. And Michael, I just want to say that we have to be very careful that we move forward from this moment, not just outraged by the extremist way Trump talks about and treats minorities in this country. But if we're going to be a conservative movement that deserves to lead, we have to be working for true equality. Martin Luther King warned us about how white Americans can cry out for decency when they see police brutality and violence, but we have to go that extra step and fight for true equality.
Mm-hmm. And Heath, I want to come back to you because Reed ended with deserves to lead. And that's resonating with me right now because I wonder how many people out there are wondering, or maybe they believe the Republican Party is undeserving to lead. And so Heath, I want to ask you, focusing around principles, what do you think are some of the principles the Republican Party needs to adapt to signal to people that we are worthy to lead this country?
Well, it's a good one, Sir Michael. And I think there are several, right? I mean, for a long time, the conservative movement has, for good reason, put at the center of its philosophy the Constitution, constitutional rights, limited government, separation of powers, the protection of private property. But so often, the Republican Party and stalwart grassroots conservatives have really failed to grapple with the imperfect nature of the way that the founders realized that vision. And because it wasn't perfect. I mean, the Constitution, for all of its strengths, didn't realize the fundamental dignity and worth of Black human beings in the United States. It okayed slavery, essentially. That grappling with the founding principles and their imperfect nature, but also the country's continual pursuit of perfection. That's what it says in our founding documents. We're always pursuing, always striving towards a more perfect union. I think connecting with that piece of our founding ideals is really going to be important as we look past Trump and winning back the trust of the American people, an American people that is more diverse than it has ever been, a younger, more vibrant and innovative American people than it has ever been. And I think if we can be honest about the challenges that we face as a people, we're likely to, assume the mantle of leadership more readily. And I hope that we can do that. And I think the convention here is an excellent start. And I've seen the conversation online trending in that direction. So I'm hopeful.
Heath, I agree with you. And I think all men and all women deserve dignity. Thank you, guys. And we'll be back with more from our panel. Up next, we'll hear from Vicki Courtney, an evangelical author and speaker who's dismayed by Trump and Trumpism's abasement of religion and women. Here's Vicki Courtney.
What an honor it is to be a part of the speaker lineup for the Convention on Founding Principles. My name is Vicki Courtney, and I am a recovering evangelical. As a bit of background, I have served for over 2 decades in Christian ministry as an author and a public speaker. Throughout my writing and speaking career, I have encouraged girls and women of all ages to define their worth by God's standards rather than by the shallow standards of the culture. In the early 2000s, I hosted conferences across the country for middle and high school girls and encouraged them to take a stand against the objectification and sexualization of girls that was rampant in media at the time. I publicly challenged the hypocrisy of the fashion magazine industry for peddling a girl power message of empowerment on their glossy front covers, right next to subtitles such as swimsuit tops that tease and please and how to be a guy magnet. I reminded them that they were made in the very image of God and pointed to Jesus Christ as the greatest liberator of all time. Fast forward to 2016. Given my background, you might imagine the dismay I felt when Donald Trump was named the Republican nominee for the office of presidency. Controversy related to Trump's misogyny was already swirling, and his lewd hot mic comments on Access Hollywood were leaked. I felt certain that would be the nail in the coffin for his evangelical base of support. Clearly, I was wrong. While many evangelicals expressed initial outrage, it was not enough to dissuade them to change course. Perhaps what I found most disturbing was the evangelical leaders who gave Trump a mulligan and chalked it off to locker room banter. Trump's disturbing track record of misogyny, racism, and xenophobia were a deal breaker for me. And come election day, I would be in the 11% minority of evangelicals voting against Donald Trump, opting instead for an independent candidate. It would mark the first time in the history of my voting record that I did not support the Republican presidential candidate. The first principle of the Convention on Founding Principles states that all men and women are created equal and free, having the same inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Women are not truly free until we are treated with the dignity and respect we deserve. It is impossible to view women as objects and at the same time view them as equal. Whether Trump is commenting on a female running mate's face or the attractiveness of Senator Ted Cruz's wife, the figure of the First Lady of France, the backside of Kim Kardashian, Lindsay Lohan's chest, or perhaps most disturbing, his own daughter Ivanka's body, Donald Trump has made it more than clear that he sees women through a filter that reduces them to nothing more than the sum of their collective body parts created for the visual and physical consumption of men. Objectification by its very nature denies equality because it involves someone being viewed as an object for the use and consumption of another. In a groundbreaking study in 2007, the American Psychological Association linked objectification to common mental health problems in women, such as disordered eating, self-esteem, body image issues, and depression. Another study related to the effects of female objectification found that women who are objectified are viewed as less than fully human, perceived to have less of a mind for thoughts or decisions, and viewed as less deserving of moral treatment by others. Sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, pornography, sex trafficking, and many other heinous crimes begin with objectification. When a person is denied personhood and viewed instead as an object, they are at risk of becoming a victim. Not surprisingly, Trump has been accused of sexual assault by over 24 women to date. At some point, even the most objective of supporters would have to stop and consider, can all the women really be lying? So where do we go from here? I want to speak candidly to evangelicals who may be on the fence regarding how they will vote on November 3rd. I want to propose that the key question facing evangelicals as we approach this election is not, should I vote for Donald Trump, but rather, does character still matter? It seemed to matter in 1998 when Bill Clinton lied about having an affair and evangelicals were united in their outrage. One well-known evangelical leader boldly proclaimed at the time that it was foolish to believe that a person who lacks honesty and moral integrity is qualified to lead a nation in the world. I concurred with that conclusion then, and I still do today. Sadly, that same evangelical leader would endorse Donald Trump in 2016 without pause and has endorsed him again in 2020. So I have to wonder, what has changed? Does character still matter to evangelicals? Additionally, how can evangelicals with a straight face encourage the next generation of young men to value women based on their personhood if we make excuses for a man with a rap sheet of offenses a mile long? Is it not confusing to young men to be taught in their churches and homes to honor, respect, and cherish women, but hear a deafening silence in response to Trump's low view of women by many of those same chivalry-promoting Christians? In the 4 years that have since followed the election, I have tried desperately to understand the unabashed support evangelicals continue to pledge to a man who is nothing like the Jesus we claim to follow. A man who on a daily basis dishes out a brand of hate that is antithetical to the very principles of Scripture Christians are called to live by. Honestly, the last 4 years have marked a turning point in my own life, and I am still in the process of detangling my own spiritual and political identity. My faith in Christ has never wavered, nor my devotion to the principles in the Bible I seek to follow. In fact, it is because of my devotion to those principles that I refuse to remain silent. Today, I consider myself evangelical in the adjective sense of the word, that is defined as pertaining to or in keeping with the gospel and its teachings. I no longer consider myself an evangelical in the noun sense of the word that has unfortunately come to represent a voting bloc for the Republican Party. As discouraging as the outcome was in 2016, there has been a silver lining. A long and overdue conversation has begun. Something triggered in women in the aftermath of the election. Donald Trump's brash and unashamed objectification of women, coupled with his lack of sorrow and repentance, thrust the issue of objectification, sexual assault, and sexual abuse into the spotlight, igniting a Me Too reckoning. Objectification is not the real issue, but rather a byproduct of a much bigger problem. Trace it back to its origins, and at the foundation, you'll find a power structure that for centuries has remained largely unchallenged. A structure where men make the rules and women are expected to follow along. A structure where men are the consumers and women are the product. A structure that, if challenged, will silence, shame, and blame anyone who dares to speak up. For the first time, many women are beginning to connect the dots and see the damage that results when we excuse objectification as the norm. The cracks in the foundation have been exposed. Women are reading the fine print of this unspoken agreement that has been in place for centuries. And one by one, many are choosing to opt out. Unlike the generations of women that came before us, we have a choice. If we are to uphold the principle that all men and women are created equal, we must reject the notion that the objectification and sexualization of girls and women is a trivial matter. And for that reason, in addition to many others, on November 3rd, I plan to vote principle over party, and I encourage you to do the same.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vicki Courtney, for talking about the importance of faith. And I want to talk a little bit to you guys, our audience who are watching, who are commenting. I want to encourage you guys to continue to do so. Comment, like, share, text this to your friends, your family members, your boyfriends, your girlfriends, your coworkers. And we also want you guys to continue to like and comment on YouTube, like and comment on Facebook, and continue to tweet #CFP 2020. I want to welcome back our panel. We're going to go with Brad and Mindy. And Mindy, I want to talk a little bit about former Vice President Joe Biden. What are your thoughts on his speech, and why do you think it resonated so much with so many Republicans?
Well, I thought it was a really beautiful speech that he gave. I mean, first and foremost, one of the things that the Trump campaign tries to define Joe Biden with is to say that he doesn't have the energy, or, he's too old. And he really attacked that speech with vigor. And I think he truly calmed the majority of the nation, pretty much, everybody except for probably the most rabid Trump supporters. His speech was quite calming at a time when we desperately need it. And the reason I think his speech was appealing to, so many Republicans who typically would always support the Republican president or presidential candidate is because he made a point of saying that he is going to be a president for all Americans, that he's a Democratic candidate, the Democratic nominee, but he will be an American president, that he will unite the country, that he will inspire, bipartisan cooperation as much as possible. He has a history of doing that throughout his career. And, this is a moment that, while the country is divided, there are a few things that we're unified on. And one of the core things that the country is unified about is that we're divided. And they want us to get back past that rancor. And they want us to get past the divisions and get to a place where we can truly feel that we are one country marching in the same direction towards a brighter future, towards progress, towards a time when the world, that all Americans could kind of be proud of our position in the world, and the world looked and admired us. And so it was those aspects of Joe Biden's speech that, I'll say, really appealed to me, and as well as appealed to the country. And, I should also add that presidents and presidential candidates, they do have a job to inspire us. That is part of the job, but ultimately it's a governing job. It is a job about bringing people together and making decisions, sound decision based on evidence, based on expert advice, so that Americans can live healthy and fulfilling lives. And this is a time when so many in the country are struggling. And so to hear him talk about and project competence was just so incredibly important. And you could really imagine him being president of the United States and allowing the country to kind of get past this exhaustion that we feel, where you have to worry about what the president's going to say or his mood or how he's going to act any one day, but get to a place where we have a steady hand in the White House that we can trust and we know is working on our behalf every single day.
Oh, thank you, Mindy. I think you're right. We are on short order for some type of competence in the White House. I think it's certainly lacking. Brad, our social media team, has told me during our previous conversation that a lot of people online are talking a lot about the potential for a third party or the need for a third party. Do you think that's possible?
You know, it's a great question. And I think what it really is representative of is there's an outcry from individuals who sit both in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party for someone to stand up for actual ideals. People are sick and tired of watching Republicans and Democrats show up in DC and have the same fights over nothing time and time again. And so I'd encourage the folks who are watching us in the live stream, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, to really sit down and talk about what are the principles that we can stand together as Americans on and move forward as a nation. So that we can continue to be the great nation that we are, and not have that be pulled apart or ripped apart by a terrible cult of personality.
No, I absolutely think you're right. And I want to thank Brad and Mindy. And again, we will see more of them throughout tonight. And let's keep that momentum going. So please continue to tweet using the hashtag CFP2020. Again, we need you guys to share this feed. We want as many people as possible watching what's going on tonight. And of course, over the next couple of days. Up next, we'll hear from Mark Galli, a minister and author who insists that we need men and women of character to lead us. Think about that, men and women of character. Here's Mark Galli.
We're not electing a pastor-in-chief. That was one of the main criticisms of my now infamous December 2019 Christianity Today editorial, in which I argued that President Trump is morally unfit for office. We don't elect political leaders for their morals, goes the sentiment, but for their ability to get things done. To many so-called realists, anyone who suggests that moral leadership is just as necessary as political skill is considered, well, woefully naive. If so, a whole school of political philosophers, starting with Aristotle, don't know what they're talking about. Of course, anyone who has been a leader knows that one does not have to play moral idealism off against realpolitik. They've had moments when they are faced not with a simple choice of good versus evil, but a choice sometimes between two goods, and worse, sometimes between two evils. And they must choose the greater good or the lesser evil. At such moments, a leader's ethics and wisdom are more crucial than ever. So we don't have to deny the moral complexity of leadership to insist that we need men and women of character to lead us. Which is why it's natural to seek leaders who do not lie or steal, who are faithful to their spouse and friends and political allies, men and women who prize doing their duty over political expediency. A populace can hardly trust leaders if such baseline ethics are habitually violated. Well, at the same time, we know human nature, and nobody expects leaders to be pastors-in-chief. To be fair and to be realistic, some of our most effective presidents and social justice champions have struggled in one or more of these areas of personal morality. Longing for moral leadership is like the line from the Pledge of Allegiance that talks about liberty and justice for all. This is not, sadly, a description of the way things already are, but an ideal toward which we continually strive as a nation. The list of virtues needed in leadership are many, of course: courage, patience, forbearance, among others. Yet at this perilous moment in our history, there is one moral virtue that is needed more than ever. It was one modeled by Abraham Lincoln at the end of the Civil War, when he said in his second inaugural address that as he strove, quote, to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, with all the firmness and the right as God gives us, we should not judge, lest we be judged. And he continued with those famous words that we should proceed with malice toward none, with charity for all. In short, the most important moral trait of a political leader, especially in times of deep conflict, is that they not use power for vengeance, but for justice grounded in mercy. It's a refusal to treat others with whom one disagrees as enemies, but only as opponents. It is to remember that even our opponents are created in the image of God, and despite their views and projects that we find unsavory, they still retain an inherent dignity we are called to respect. Among the many moral failings of our current president, his failure in this regard is most egregious. Just take his Twitter feed alone. Mr. Trump habitually ridicules his opponents, describing them as unhinged, crazy, lying, disgraced, losers, crooked, phony, fake, and his favorite, people of low IQ. His comments, which rage every day of the year and many times during the day, are the epitome of contempt for other human beings. Those who disagree with him are enemies who should be humiliated. He claims to be pro-life and yet has no respect whatsoever for the lives of those who disagree with him. He is the most divisive, mean-spirited, and vengeful president in the history of the United States. One might argue he makes Richard Nixon look like a saint. And while it's true that national divisiveness precedes his presidency, who cannot help but see that he has made our divisions only ever deeper? We now look across a great chasm with hate for one another, so that the American experiment in democracy threatens to collapse. But let us not judge, lest we be judged. We who seek to displace Mr. Trump from office are tempted by a great irony. In the cause of repudiating his moral legacy, we may merely sustain it by mirroring his caustic behavior. We are wise to remember that Donald Trump is also made in God's image, as are all his advisors, as are Republicans who have sold their souls to sidle up to power, as are white supremacists emboldened by his contempt of others, as are those evangelicals, my brothers and sisters in faith, who talk about Mr. Trump in messianic terms. Now, this doesn't mean we should become models of sunshine and sweetness, ignoring injustice and immoral leadership for the sake of a false peace. No, far from it. But it does mean we should not talk about our opponents as if the only solution is that they need an exorcism. In short, let us fight not to humiliate them and then glory in our own victory, but so that justice and peace may prevail for all. And if our anger is too deeply embedded in our hearts and in bitterness we cannot think of them as anything but enemies, well, okay, I get it. Let us then at least remember the bracing words of the one who called us to love not just our neighbors, but also our enemies. We will not have any right to take up moral leadership in any capacity, from the local school board to Congress to the presidency, if in achieving a strategic victory we simply seek to punish the losers. Bearing as they do the imprint of divine dignity, we respect them still, not because they are right, but in spite of the fact that we believe them wrong, catastrophically wrong in some cases. We do so with the hope of healing a nation afflicted with the pandemic of polarization and helping us once again to become a people whose pursuit of justice and truth is ever tempered by mercy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for highlighting the importance of leaders with a moral compass. Here's our next speaker, Mona Charen, who is an author. She's a journalist and also a political commentator. Here's Mona Charen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mona Charen, and I am thrilled to add my voice to those of others who are affirming the importance of principles in American life. My task is to address the indispensability of honor, integrity, and service in elected officials. Now, whenever you talk about integrity, you run smack into the cynics. They scoff at you. Grow up, they say. Politics ain't beanbag. Everybody does it. Or as our president likes to say, there are only two kinds of people in the world, killers and losers. One time, after praising Vladimir Putin and being reminded that Putin kills people, the president said, "What, you think we're so innocent? We kill a lot of people too." The cynics are wrong. At least they're wrong about America. We've committed our share of sins and errors, but we are not like Russia, not remotely, and our sense of honor is one of our greatest strengths. Without integrity in public service, trust is impossible. And without trust, this experiment in self-government cannot survive. Loyalty to tribe or land characterizes people everywhere. We Americans have that, of course, but we have something more. We have a devotion to the principles and ideals of the founding and the Constitution. We expect each American, and particularly each public official, to be loyal not to person or race or ethnic group, but to the nation. When we swear an oath, it is not to a party, it is to the Constitution of the United States. Now, let me tell you another story. In 2000, we had the closest presidential election in American history. George W. Bush and Al Gore were separated by just a little more than 500 votes in the state of Florida to decide the election. The post-election legal wrangling, which dragged on for a month, was intense and tempers were extremely frayed. Though it embarrasses me to reflect on it now. At the time, I was a passionate, extremely partisan Republican. I despised Al Gore and thought his victory would represent a grave evil for the nation. I followed every twist and turn of the recount and the legal maneuvers with manic intensity, never for 1 second considering the possibility that the Democrat actually could have won. I interpreted every Democratic move as a sign of bad faith. Finally, on December 12th, just 6 days before the Electoral College would meet to decide the election, the Supreme Court issued its ruling. Florida's recount violated the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. George W. Bush would be the next president. I was thrilled and deeply relieved, but I was a bit worried about what the effect might be among Democrats. Would they feel cheated? Would they accept it? Would there be violence? What happened next has stayed with me. Al Gore immediately accepted the decision. He instructed his staff that no one was to criticize the Supreme Court, and then he delivered the most gracious and elevating concession speech in recent American history. He said this, "I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. We didn't want it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, not under man, but under God and law. That's the ruling principle of American freedom, source of our democratic liberties." And then at the very end, he said, "While we hold and do not yield our opposing beliefs, there is a higher duty than the one we owe to a political party. This is America, and we put country before party. We will stand together behind our new president." Gore's speech was a revelation to me. It helped me to see how much partisanship had warped my perceptions. Gore had different policy priorities, of course, but he believed in the same eternal principles I did. He was loyal to the rule of law and to the Constitution, and that's what matters most. President Trump and those who view the world as he does probably think of Al Gore as a pathetic loser. Well, he did lose an election, but he gained an honored place in history by his graciousness. Besides, it isn't losing that's pathetic. It's being unable to accept a fair loss that's pathetic. It could have gone very differently. If Al Gore had been a different kind of man, he might have condemned the Supreme Court. Because of his personal disappointment, he could have issued baseless charges of partisan influence or of corrupt payoffs. He could have undermined people's faith in our institutions in many ways, and considering the raw state of the country's nerves at the time, he could have done real harm. Instead, he chose to reaffirm faith in institutions and to put his own feelings aside in the name of national unity. In short, he acted as a real leader. It's certainly possible to have a country in which people are motivated only by self-interest or group interests. It's possible to convince people that everyone cheats and that the only way to survive in this world is to do unto others before they can do unto you. But that country wouldn't be America. America is a nation of laws. It's a nation of rights-bearing individuals who place loyalty to the Constitution above personal or party advantage. It's a nation that demands integrity, because only when those in power behave honorably can those who lose elections accept the results without fear. Let me say that in a different way. If every election is a contest of unscrupulous liars and cheats who seek advantage only for themselves and their own teams, then democracy cannot survive. Without some sense of integrity, without some minimal standards of decency and fair play among office holders, those who lose will have no faith in their government, and thus no reason to abide by the results of elections. So the stakes are very high. Upholding principles isn't just a boutique taste for an elite few. It's the bedrock of our democracy. We can tolerate a few miscreants and villains. What we can never do without losing our country is accept that corruption and venality are normal. Jefferson said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." We, his successors, must say, "We hold these principles to be inviolable." And among these are honor, integrity, and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona, for those clear insights, and I agree the stakes are high. I want to bring in Evan McMullin. Evan, you were a CIA officer. You've been inside of dictatorships all around the world, trying to encourage people to stand up for liberty. What lessons have you taken from those experiences that you believe can be applied to America today?
Thanks, Michael. I think the number one most important lesson in this regard is about truth. Dictators, of course, choose to benefit themselves, to serve themselves in office. Their abuses of power and corruption then require them to hide the truth, to obscure the truth, to discourage people from continuing to find the truth. And what happens as a result of that is that their governance is so terrible that ultimately the people start to suffer. And the truth of their failure to govern, of their corruption, becomes clear. And so the advantage then is with the people who are aligned with the truth. And I think we see that in America today, where the president, an aspiring dictator in my view, has so divorced himself from the truth that he's unable to lead the country during this pandemic and the related economic struggles. And so those of us who oppose him and who would like to replace him, we're aligned with the truth, and that gives us enormous power to make that change happen.
Evan, I think you just called the President of the United States an inspiring dictator. I don't know what to say to that. Our final speaker of the night is a man who has dedicated his life to serving our country, General Michael Hayden. Evan, you had the privilege of interviewing him for the convention about the importance of truth. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I went to speak with General Hayden recently about this important topic of truth. He's written a book about it in part, but more importantly, he led the National Security Agency for 6 years, and then he led the CIA for about another 3 years, and he's had other senior national security roles in which his responsibility was to lead thousands of U.S. intelligence officers in a hunt for truth globally that then General Hayden and other national security leaders can take to our policymakers so that they can make smart decisions about our national security. So he knows a thing or two about truth and how to find it and how to learn it when it's difficult to do. And he explains in this conversation I have with him how sometimes that's difficult, but that it's very important that we keep striving to do that. Now, the other thing that I'll mention about Hayden is, as many people in the audience know, he suffered from a stroke a couple of years ago. But let me tell you, General Hayden remains completely engaged, even while he suffers from some of the physical complications as a result of that stroke. He struggles to speak, but he is fully aware and highly concerned about the direction of things in our country. And he had some very important warnings and some insights about truth that he wanted to share despite his physical challenges in the moment. So with that, let's go to General Hayden.
I believe in America, but I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. Mike Hayden, I was the former director of CIA and NSA. By and large, America needs truth. Truth will set you free, okay? And if you don't know the truth, how are you going to judge our government? Without the truth, what can we do about anything? I'll give an example, okay? About almost 10, 20 years ago, okay, I was at CIA. I would say, Mr. President, we believe this is really happening. Mr. President, we believe this is right. It's hard, and frankly, it's 50-50, maybe 75. But in a week or a month or a year, I would go back to the president and say, you know, that was exactly right. Or I would say, you know, Mr. President, that's not exactly right. We have to change our method about that, okay? And so for the American people, that was okay, because every day you strive to know the truth, and the next day, maybe it'll be a little bit better. That's the way, and that's the truth in America. I think about things going on in the other parts of the world, and now it's in America. Oh my God, that's in America. That's really something to behold. Dictators know that if they go to the truth, that will be not good for them. And so, like, well, in China, okay, or in Turkey or other places, very often they know the truth but don't want to say it, okay? And so, because that would not be good for the dictators. 2 days ago, I was watching the president, and I was saying, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. That's not right. But he says it again and again and again. Why is that? He doesn't want us to know the facts. That's the problem. Alternative facts. And you think about that. What does that mean? But he does that a lot. I don't know I just don't know for an American president to do that. And I don't want that president to be in office. The courts are very important. Intelligence is very important. Science is very important. The president attacks every day. Science, the media, intelligence, every day. And why? Because he's afraid of the truth. He has a problem with truth, and he doesn't want to know the truth, because if the truth were laid out, the president would be wrong. In America right now, many people say, oh, the president is right. And actually, for America, that's not right. The president lies about the election because he doesn't think he'll win. He knows the truth, and he should say it, okay? And this president does not say it at all. And that's a real problem. And if this president has 2 terms, I don't know what will happen to the American Republic. If there is a second term, America will suffer. The truth is everywhere. Strive to know the truth. It's hard sometimes, okay? But if you work on it, okay, things are better and better and better. Basically, we know what Americans believe, okay? Now, I'm not at all sure about America and what's going on. That's the problem. I hope we're okay, but now I'm not so sure. In America, there's really some bad things going on for our entire history, okay? But little by little, we're doing a better job.
Thank you, General Hayden, and we thank you for your lifetime commitment to our country. He's a true American hero. Our commitment to truth is fundamental to our ability to govern ourselves. It's a core factor in the strength of our republic. So I want to welcome back our panel, Brad and Reed. And guys, the theme for tonight was a republic if you can keep it. We've heard from a lot of speakers about the forces that threaten to fracture our republic and our responsibility to hold it accountable. But Brad, I want to go to you first. What stood out most to you tonight? Brad, are you there? Unmute.
Really, what stood out most to me was the wide breadth of speakers that we've had from across the political spectrum, from across every corner of this nation, who recognize that something is wrong and it's time to stand up and it's time to do something about it. I, for one, am encouraged, and I do believe that we have the opportunity to keep our republic.
Brad, you know, the fun part about being on the internet, doing this digitally, technical problems do exist, like forgetting to unclick mute. So we're going to have a little fun with this tonight, guys. Reed, what do you hope people get out of tonight?
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that I've been really excited about through the course of the evening is the hope that I see in all the speakers and all the folks tuning in from across America. We have not given up on this country, and it's a real reason to stay in this fight. What's inspired me is all of the folks who are willing to defy the binds of partisanship in service to a higher calling, citizenship. And that's what we're really going to need in order to move this country forward.
Look, I absolutely agree. And I think a lot of people are committed to doing just that. I want to thank our panelists and thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. And thanks to all of our speakers. Be sure to share the speeches you've heard tonight and check out the other speeches released on our website, on our YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. Like you, I am energized to know that so many Americans are a part of this fight to put principles back at the center of our politics. But guess what, guys? We are only just getting started. Tomorrow's theme is of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's an iconic quote from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address that has become the definitive description of the American experiment in liberty. We'll hear from James Comey, Christine Todd Whitman, David Jolly, North Carolina's own Judge Bob Orr, human rights and chess champion Garry Kasparov, and more. Plus a tribute to a true American hero. Make sure you don't miss a moment. Share your thoughts on night one by using the hashtag CFP2020, and be sure to join us again right here tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Good night, and God bless America.